I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. The presidential race is as tight as ever, but does recent polling reflect what's really going on? Here with me today to discuss why we must always account for the margin of error is founder and president of Monadnock Strategies, Jesse Hunt. Jesse Hunt, did I say that right?
Yes, very well, 99.9%.
Okay, that sounds good. Welcome to Perino on Politics. This is where I call my smart friends up and find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. Tell me, why did you name your company that? What is this?
So it's actually the region where I hail from.
Okay.
Anyone who is interested in presidential politics, the Monadnock region, southwestern New Hampshire area, right near like Rindge, Jaffrey. I live in Massachusetts, but right on the border, right along between Mount Monadnock is a famous mountain in the area. So I wanted to pay homage to a place where I grew up. And,
I love that.
And it was unique, and it was no one else was going to have it named.
That's right. You got the domain name easily.
Exactly. So although I will say this, if you go to the area, there are so many different companies in that region that use the Monadnock name for a handful of different companies. So fortunately, none of them are in public affairs or communications consulting.
Monadnock. So now you know what Jesse does. We've been friends for a very long time. It's so good to have you on the show today. Before we get into the politics of things, let's talk about what happened on Sunday, September 15th. This is, we are recording on Monday. On the 15th, yesterday afternoon, at about 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, at Trump's International Golf Course, a Secret Service agent who was very sharp-eyed and very quick saw the barrel of a gun, of a rifle, poking through a fence, and he took the shot. He didn't kill the suspect. The suspect dropped everything, got in a car, and a very quick-thinking eyewitness takes a photograph of the car with the license plates, gets that to police, and the suspect, Ryan Routh, he's 58 years old, is being charged today in state and federal court. And so, Jesse, we are grateful that he is all right. But this is the second attempt in 2 months on Trump's life. Very different events. The first one was a big public event with a lot of planning. This was at a private golf course. And yet the ability to potentially assassinate the president was right there. And just get your thoughts on that before we talk a little bit more about politics.
Of course. It's an alarming development in American politics. I was going to use the word trend, but the fact that I can use the word trend and it's applicable is something that doesn't belong in our politics. And I do think it's incumbent on everyone to keep this trend in mind as we, handle the political debate inside the political arena, knowing that, look, there has been tons of evidence that have shown that mental issues are becoming more prevalent in American society. We saw what happened in 2017 with the congressional shooting. There's been 2 attempts on President Trump's life in 60-something days?
Yeah.
That is a huge problem if you're looking at our society writ large, and I do think it's incumbent on both sides to address it and make sure that supporters understand that while politics is an intense conversation and people are very passionate about these ideas, violence is never the answer.
And we are very fortunate that we're not having a different conversation. This is what I said after the first one. Like this conversation we'd be having now would be extraordinarily, exceedingly different if one of these would-be assassins was successful. So the Secret Service was able to take care of this one, and we hope that there's never another attempt or that we figure out a way to deal with that appropriately and effectively going forward. Okay, now to politics. We are a week from the one and possibly only presidential candidate debate that we will have. And I don't know what you think about all of it, Jesse. I believe that the bottom line consensus from most people is that The debate didn't change the race much. Certainly undecided voters who were spoken to said, didn't get enough there to make a decision. There's not many of those people left. But the ABC poll that came out from the weekend shows that Harris was beating him in the national race, 51-46, but that the swing state polling still shows Trump either tied or ahead in those key states. So where do you see that race right now?
I think it's where most people expected it to be at the outset of 2023, right? Before Biden collapsed, before Biden had a lot of his issues, right? Democrats performed better than most had expected in 2022. A lot of the Senate races, some of the governor's races, obviously the House was a whole lot closer than anyone expected, right? You remember Kevin McCarthy, looking ahead to what was supposed to be a very resounding majority after their races concluded in 2022, and it wasn't that. So, right, coming into the presidential cycle, there were higher expectations for Democrats that they could make this competitive. Obviously, they didn't, and that's what resulted in Biden exiting the race. I do think it's reverted back to the outset of the cycle where, yes, Democrats have come home to support Kamala Harris. That is a fact. They're certainly more energized right now. You're seeing it in national polls. You're seeing it in battleground polls where Democrats are now more engaged. And that goes to my point with like some of the polling where it is always going to be close throughout the next 7 weeks of this election. Like the election day is going to be close. That's why margins of error exist in polling. And a lot of times that is to account for the composition of party breakdown, ideological breakdown. And so what Democrats have prevented is a massive drop off among their key constituencies. That said, a lot of these undecided voters, the persuadable voters, do have a good, I would say, BS detector. Mm-hmm. And they do know that what Kamala was promising in that debate, there's no substance to it. It's a lot of like empty platitudes and like these vague ideas. And many people are like, okay, sure. But like, you're also the vice president and your party's in power. Why aren't these ideas being enacted right now?
Yeah, so Trump got to that at the end of the debate last week. So she did do one more interview, and that was with local Philadelphia, ABC, I believe, but local Philadelphia news. Now, you've been in politics a long time, and I have my good friend Jeannie Mama, who handled local media for us when we were at the White House. I mean, those interviews are not easy. I think some people make the mistake to think, because it's not a big national interview, that it's safer to do or easier to do. That is not the case. And these are sharp journalists. This man, I can't remember his name, but he asked her about the economy, and her answer was really abysmal. And it kind of got overtaken by events because it happened on Friday, and then you had the assassination attempt news. Plus, you've had all the things going on about Springfield, Ohio. So it didn't get a lot of attention. But undecided voters are looking at things like that answer on the economy where there was just no substance and saying, I don't know if I can get to a decision to support her if the policies of the Biden-Harris administration are just going to continue. They just might not be able to go for that.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, Kamala has the ability, as does Joe Biden, to meaningfully improve some of these people's lives. Like they're sitting around looking and wondering why their grocery bills are so much more expensive than they were in 2020, 2021. Mm-hmm. You have about 20% cumulative inflation since Joe Biden entered office. So, year over year, it's becoming more average. Like that doesn't mean that people don't remember what it was like before the massive spike. And the fact that it's not going down still creates a bunch of problems for people. And you're talking about higher housing costs. And Kamala Harris is coming up with some of these, I wouldn't necessarily call them ideas. I actually think they're not particularly well thought out. They're crafted so that she could put them on paid advertising and then try to convince voters that she's, quote unquote, has a plan for how she's going to fix the problems that ail them. But they could be doing this stuff now. And I would actually venture to like, they've contributed, they've caused the problems. Mm-hmm. It's not just we have a plan to solve it. It's like we have a plan to put out the fire that we started, and our plan lacks substance. And I think that's why you're not seeing the shift that they had hoped for coming out of the convention, coming out of the debate among these undecided voters.
And do you think that the Taylor Swift endorsement matters or not? Let me just tell you what ABC said. Just 6% said that the songwriter's endorsement of Harris makes them more likely to vote for her. 13% said it makes them less likely to support her. And 81% said it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah, if we learned anything over the last several cycles, celebrity endorsements mean absolutely nothing. I think the last person you could say it really helped was Barack Obama in 2008, but it was a foregone conclusion to begin with. So it was the last time where you had an overwhelming number of celebrities who really used their influence. He became, the Hope T-shirts were in posters were the biggest fashion symbol and thing to have in college dorms room at the time. We all know celebrity endorsements mean absolutely nothing to people who are trying to figure out how they're going to feed their kids, how they're going to take care of their kids, how they're going to pay for housing, how they're going to pay for gasoline to get to work. Those are all the things that people care about. And, Taylor Swift's opinion on that, it doesn't really change.
I've been thinking a lot about retirees, and retirees are often a very reliable vote. Especially if they voted their whole lives, they're going to be likely to vote again. And then they've got grandchildren they're worried about, and they're also on a fixed income. So inflation has really hurt them the most. And in one of the stories that Dana Marie McNichol did for us the other day on America's Newsroom, she showed that the fastest growing group of job seekers are people who had already retired. And I'm wondering how that will affect the race, if at all.
Obviously, seniors also deal with a lot of healthcare costs as well, and we're seeing healthcare costs. Healthcare hasn't been a major part of this conversation.
No.
That's something that's always on their minds because it's natural, right? For a lot of them, different out-of-pocket costs, things that different fees that get tacked on to their hospital bills, right? But you have a lot of those folks who are certainly concerned about the everyday goods and necessities, but also healthcare is a major concern for seniors on fixed incomes as well. I think there's also probably a degree of uncertainty about the economic environment in the market. A lot of these folks are, have their 401ks that they've relied on. Some obviously have pension plans that are fixed and, not as market dependent. But I think all of that uncertainty leads to them, having to explore other options. And that might mean returning to the workforce. Obviously 2020 was a unique time, right? You saw a kind of an exodus from the work. A lot of people retiring early. So that might also be a factor too. People decided to leave the workforce early and they thought they could retire, but with the exploding costs around them, they're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I did retire too early during the pandemic. And it makes sense for us to jump back into the workforce. Another
thing I wanted to ask about is you said you're in Massachusetts, and I noted this weekend that very liberal Senator Ed Markey made some comments in which he said that he and Elizabeth Warren, the other very liberal senator from Massachusetts, said they have full confidence that Kamala Harris is just going to be the very best president. Bernie Sanders said something similar last week. He said, yeah, I think that she's just pretending to move to the... I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, I think she's just doing what she has to do to be practical to win the election, but her progressive values haven't changed. Does that hurt her in the long run?
It's people who... You're talking about people who ostensibly know her the best, right? A lot of her former Senate colleagues and people who are, prominent elected officials within the Democratic Party. And they're saying, yeah, you know what? We know where her core lies, right? This is a very liberal person from the Bay Area in California. We know what her ideology is. And I think it's far more reflective. I think her positions in 2020 were far more reflective of who she actually is and how she would govern. Her team told her, they showed her some polling, and she made the craven decision to just flip on everything in order to, run the vibes campaign during this stretch of time when she didn't actually have to earn a single primary vote, right? She is the first candidate that has been replaced at this stage of the race and avoided an open primary. I guarantee you, if she went through an open primary, she would not have moved on any of these positions.
And she probably would not have won a primary.
No, absolutely not. And what these senators are saying is the truth. That she is going to govern as a dangerous liberal.
Well, and there wasn't a Republican primary. Well, there was. I mean, it wasn't really, but it really wasn't. It's like, not that I don't remember being in New Hampshire, because I do, and I certainly love the place. But it was pretty much a foregone conclusion at that point. All right, Jesse, we will be right back. And we are back with Perino on Politics, and thanks for being here, Jesse Hunt. Great to have you. I haven't spent a lot of time talking about something you know very well, which is the gubernatorial races that are happening right now all across the country. I know that there are many, and many of them matter a lot. Tell us about that and how you are thinking about that, and how that also might affect the presidential election, if at all.
For sure. These are some of the most consequential races that you'll have in the country. Because I think everyone learned that during COVID, how much power and influence a state executive has. You're looking at two, I would say, really competitive gubernatorial races in North Carolina and New Hampshire. You have outgoing Governor Roy Cooper in North Carolina, and then the retiring Governor Chris Sununu in New Hampshire. New Hampshire recently had their primaries conclude, and it'll be former Senator Kelly Ayotte versus Joyce Craig, former mayor of Manchester, as the Democrat nominee. You're looking to string together what is a continuation of the Sununu tenure. I think Ayotte is running in that capacity. But
so she's already won statewide before as a senator. Can she do it again?
If there's anyone that can do it, it is her. She lost by a very, very narrow margin in 2016 in a state that Hillary Clinton carried. Biden carried it again in 2020. All indications would say that Harris is poised to carry that state. But a lot of the problems that are in the metro Manchester area are related to policies that Joyce Craig pursued during her time as mayor. So I think that may come back to hurt her. So I think Ayotte is well positioned to be as competitive as she can possibly be in a state that she's going to have to rely on split ticket voters to win. I don't necessarily the Trump campaign has not given any indication that they believe New Hampshire is part of their path to 270.
But did they have a little bit of a path when Biden was the nominee?
When Biden was the nominee, you were talking about landslide electoral margins. You were talking about probably 55, 56 Senate seats, a massive majority.
Wow.
In the House. That's how they convinced him. That's how Schumer and more specifically Nancy Pelosi convinced him that it was time to step aside, because you were talking about just a bloodbath up and down the ticket for Democrats. Now in North Carolina, it's interesting. North Carolina is one of those states that is trends red at the federal level, but Democrats have had a lot of success on the state level, particularly in statewide elections and statewide state officials, right? Your secretaries of state, your attorneys general, your governors. In the last 12 gubernatorial elections in North Carolina, Democrats have won 9 times. So that's a pretty strong history of success there. The difference that you have in 2024 is that there's an open seat. Power of incumbency is real when it comes to gubernatorial elections. As I went through last cycle when I was the communications director at the RGA, it is a very difficult thing to do to dislodge an incumbent because of some of the, I would say, media advantages they have. Not only do they have more money to spend on paid media, but they can go and do a ribbon cutting ceremony in just about every media market in the state, and all the local affiliates will show up and cover it. And that is something that voters still tune into every single night. They are very tuned into what their local broadcast television has to say. You now have Josh Stein versus Mark Robinson. Now, both are current statewide elected officials, but they are not the governor. I think that gives Republicans a bit of an opportunity to be competitive in this state. Trump won North Carolina by about 75,000 votes in 2020. I think if he has a similar or better margin there, that will really help Mark Robinson. There are only so many ticket splitters out there, but he is going to be dependent on the top of the ticket. If you see a slip to less than, say, 50 to 40,000, there is a better chance for Democrats to to actually pick up enough split ticket voters to be successful in that statewide election.
Let's spend just a couple of minutes on Larry Hogan. He was the governor of Maryland, Republican. Was he term limited or decided not to run again?
He was term limited.
Term limited. Okay.
Unfortunately, we'd love for him to run again last cycle.
So a big coup for some Republicans in their minds in order to get him to run for Senate. And now he's running tied with a Democrat in a very Democrat state, very blue state. And I know that he and Trump don't get along and they don't like each other or they can't support each other. But I would imagine Larry Hogan would probably vote with a President Trump 96% of the time on votes that come up to Capitol Hill. Does he have a shot of winning that Maryland seat, which would nudge up the numbers for the Republicans on the Senate side?
All public polling that we've seen shows it a pretty tight race. So it's one of those that's worth watching. And Larry Hogan certainly has the best chance that any Republican could hope for in a state like Maryland. That said, there's oftentimes, we're seeing fewer and fewer states split their ticket when it comes to Senate and president. I think ultimately they get pretty convinced that they need to back whatever majority they believe in. But Larry Hogan has delivered so much for that state during his tenure as governor that I think people will have a degree of confidence there that he will put the state first and not necessarily a party ideology. I think he's proven that. This is not just somebody who's, talking the talk. He's actually walked the walk and has these, different policies or different public breaks from the party that he can point to and convince people that, he is going to be on their side, not a party side.
All right. We are going to take a quick break on Perino on Politics and be right back. And welcome back to Perino on Politics. This is segment 3, and this is where I ask my smart friends like you, Jesse Hunt, what are you paying attention to in these last several weeks of a presidential election that myself and my listeners should pay attention to? Because then we'll look smarter than we are.
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it a little bit, and that was what I feel like is people sometimes, I guess there's this perception that there might be a shocking result, and there really shouldn't, because all of our public polling and even internal polling is meant to get an understanding of how the race can be influenced as opposed to being predictive, right? People on campaigns, and I continue to work on many campaigns, you don't do polling to try to predict the outcome. You do it so that you can make necessary changes with key constituencies or key groups of voters that you need to target, that you believe should be on your side, whether it's seniors, whether it's young voters, whether it's college plus or non-college. Those are the sorts of things that polling is meant to inform. And so that's why a margin of error exists, because a lot of times you won't know exactly what the outcome, the composition of the electorate will look like, right? In terms of identified Republicans, identified independents, identified Democrats, which is a lot of what you're trying to factor into when you're going through, building out a poll. So a lot of times people are like, well, that poll shows Trump up 3, but it's way more heavy for Republicans than it was in 2020. Or, you'll have Harris up 8 and it's way more Democratic than you would have expected based on 2020 or 2016. And those are the sorts of things that I would caution people against when it comes to looking at polls and trying to use it as a predictor for it is going to be a very close election. We are in a very divided country. In each state, you're talking about 10 to maybe 20,000 voters who matter in those 7 battleground states. Wow. So your vote matters. Pay attention and don't be surprised if Trump or Harris win on just because a poll says something 2 weeks out doesn't mean that that's what the end result is going to look like on election night.
Right. Let me ask you one thing. I know that you're working with Eric Hovde. He's the Senate candidate in Wisconsin. That is pretty much the ultimate swing state. And Wisconsin, boy, it gives Republicans and Democrats fits every single time. If you had to tell us how you think that race will turn out, what would you say? What are the main issues there? I'm assuming it's the economy.
It is the economy. It is immigration, because every state is a border state and every community is a border community. You have fentanyl that is poisoning communities left and right, and it's all flowing across the southern border. And that's because of Biden. That's because of Harris, and that's because of people like Tammy Baldwin, who have neglected to take this issue as seriously as they should. They rolled back all the Trump administration policies that were working, that were stemming the flow of illegal immigration, and now they're having to answer for it. You have someone like Tammy Baldwin, who's running around the state talking, in paid advertising, talking about the work that she's done on fentanyl. But Wall Street Journal just did a story this weekend where talking to people who were actually involved in passing the bill, they said Baldwin had absolutely nothing to do with it. So I think that's the sort of stuff that really matters to voters. Tammy Baldwin hasn't really been able to bring home any sort of meaningful, tangible accomplishments to sell to her constituents. And she's also, hiding from some really serious questions about, her personal relationship that she has with her partner. Her partner is a private wealth advisor in New York City and does not disclose her assets and does not disclose her client list. And Baldwin regulates industries that her partner invests her clients in. So that's something that, when you talk about someone like Tammy Baldwin, who's, been in office since 2013, right? She was elected in 2012. She's changed a little bit. And that's the sort of thing that does give voters pause when it comes to supporting her for a third term.
I thought it was interesting because one of the knocks against Hovde was that he hasn't lived in Wisconsin or that he's lived other places. And then I'm reading in the article, I'm like, but wait, she spends almost all of her time in New York City. So what do the voters of Wisconsin just say that's a wash?
The Hovde name is entrenched in Wisconsin. The businesses that they run, the people that they employ, the amount of time that Eric Hovde spent in Wisconsin, right? This is, somebody who went to school right there in Madison, right, and has spent his entire life with connections to Wisconsin. So, I will also say this: one of the best confirmations that you can get in terms of where is he from, who is he connected to, just listen to him speak. He's one of them.
All right, Jesse Hunt, it was great to have you on the podcast. Thank you for being here today.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. I love my smart friends. Thank you.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.